recorded. Oh, somebody hit record for me. Thank you. I forgot. I was going to hit it after I did this. Please hop off the call at this time. Recording has started. Second, you are all muted right now. However, we will have some time at the end of the session for Q&A. You will also be able to utilize the chat feature to type in your questions, and we will go over them at the end. And finally, the recording of the webinar will be available on the Metro Nashville YouTube channel within 1 to 3 business days. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dustin with Smart Growth America. We're super excited about being able to be part of this and learning more about complete streets. Dustin?
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for having me. It's really great to speak to you. I know that some of you would have joined the first session that we did before, but just to give you a little bit, a brief intro to myself, I am Dustin Robertson. I'm a Complete Streets Program Manager with Smart Growth America. So we advise cities and towns and work with them to really achieve their Complete Streets and Smart Growth goals. We are doing a 4-part webinar series with the city of Nashville to really, make progress and advance on the Complete Streets goals for the city. There's a lot of exciting stuff going on, and we want to share what we have learned working with other places throughout the country, and maybe learn a little bit from you all as well, because as we know, every place is a little bit different. Everywhere we go, we hear some different things and learn some new aspects. But yeah, it's really great to be here. For the first session, and the links are available online, which Diana said, we really talked about the case for complete streets. Why do you need complete streets at all? And there we really pointed out multiple aspects of complete streets. There's the safety aspect, the health aspect, environmental aspect, economic, lots of different reasons why complete streets make sense. So that was really making the case. Now in the second session, we're really going to talk about how do you do it? What do they actually look like? And for that, we're joined by one of our friends and partners from Michael Baker International. So I'm going to introduce our guest speaker for the day is Peter Quintanilla. He is a national director for Design Hub at Michael Baker International. He has extensive experience working with communities and cities in the U.S. and around the world. He has served on several ULI National TAP groups and CNU on topics that range from resiliency to urban design. He is currently leading several national projects that include complete streets, facade improvements, and park designs. If you want more of his extensive experience and impressive profile, I'll drop his LinkedIn in the chat. But otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Peter, and he is going to tell you all about a little bit of his work and complete streets as it applies to your case.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Dustin and Diane. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. And I'm very happy to be here and talk to have this opportunity to talk some more about something that's very close and dear to my heart, which is complete street, but not only complete street, but also the impact that a complete street actually has in communities. And of course, before that, I would like to start by saying I am an architect, actually by trade, but I've been doing urban design work. And right now I'm working at the Michael Baker International, which some of you folks probably know because our office is outside of Raleigh, actually it's in Cary. And, we have a lot of projects that we're working for the city of Raleigh. But I'm actually in the city of Pittsburgh, and I lead this national group that we do more urban design and more of that complete street process that for the whole entire company. And we often partner with a lot of different organizations. And of course, I am one of the participants of the Smart Growth Complete Street Coalition. So that's where I see Dustin and all the other folks over in Washington. Whenever we sit down, we talk about what is the next big thing about complete streets, right? But in doing so, the one thing that always struck me is that everybody's always talking about complete street. And now, of course, if you think about Safe Street for All, it's almost the same thing as a complete street, right? That it's all about creating accessible street for everybody to actually enjoy. But I wanted to take it into the next level, which is why is it that we need something like a complete street or Safe Street for All? And I think for me, in talking to more with a lot of the folks and around the country, is the idea that we obviously need to decrease the amount of pedestrians injuries. We need to make sure that people are able to go and enjoy their community, be able to walk and not necessarily be depending on a car, right? But then there's the other element, which is the economic impact that a complete street or safe street actually has on the community. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But in general, it's not only about, complete street or safe street for all. It's not all about safety. I feel that it actually has a lot more. It's a lot more deeper than just that. It is the health element, like Dustin was saying, allowing people to get out of their houses and be able to walk, having social places that they're able to walk to and enjoy. The economic vitality is something that I'm going to focus a little bit more on the presentation later on. And the environment, I think it's just that obviously more people are walking, less people are driving, it's better for the environment in general, right? So, but like what I was saying right now is, a lot of people end up going to places like Europe, for example, because they like to walk around in a fantastic main street, right? Well, those are streets that are very accessible to everybody. And, we have some beautiful streets in the United States. We just need to tweak them a little bit to make them so that it's accessible to everybody. But again, the social places and the economic vitality that comes with a really great place. I'm gonna just I don't mean to poke at any street, any city around, but this is actually a city down south, and it's actually one that I did a lot of drawings for Smart Growth America, and they're Dangerous by Design Street, and this happens to be in Baton Rouge. And this one intersection is one that Dustin, I think there was an injury, right, or somebody actually died right when you guys were doing some video around this area. But this was one intersection that we wanted to look at, which is incredible because if you think about it, this is actually a roadway that goes and bisects this community. There are crosswalks at a quarter of a mile in both directions. So if you want to cross, you have to walk a quarter of a mile, come around another quarter of a mile to keep on going on your journey, when instead you could just cross the street. But as you can see there on this image, there are no sidewalks. Well, if you think about it from the perspective of let's dissect what's happening here, right? Because this is what's happening in a lot of our places in the United States is there are very few sidewalks. And right here, I just highlighted in yellow, in a dark yellow, mustard color, the sidewalks that you see in our illustration. There is a lot of no man's land, like that extra concrete, extra asphalt that really, it's car can go there, people can bike there, or people can walk there, but it's actually, the only thing that it's really doing is actually contributing to the heat island effect for this whole entire neighborhood. The crosswalk is very critical, and I always think about the crosswalk as I measure it not only the feet, but also like how many seconds would somebody who is disabled or my grandmother, for example, how long would it take her to cross that sidewalk, that street, right? And in this case, it's 43 feet, about 43 feet. It would take her about 17 seconds for somebody to cross. If you're saying it's 2.5 feet per second for a pedestrian to be able to cross. And this is crossing without even a crosswalk, without even thinking that there's a crosswalk or cars understanding that there could potentially be a pedestrian there. And then the other piece, which is also very critical and important, and we tend to forget, are these areas of conflict.
Peter, can I interrupt you 1 second?
Yes.
There's something in the chat. Someone is having trouble seeing the slides. I wanted to do a survey. Are there people seeing Peter's slides, or are they still on the cover slide?
I can see it.
I can see it.
Okay. Joe, I'm afraid it may be a you issue. Maybe disconnect and reconnect or something. Maybe it's just, or maybe there's a lag, but lots of other people are saying that they're seeing it.
Okay, good.
Okay, and let us know if it doesn't work, and maybe we can share the presentation afterwards or something like that, Joe. Okay, sorry for that, Peter. Please continue.
No, that was good. And you were seeing the area of conflict slide, right? That's where we're at right now. Okay,
yes.
good.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So the area of conflict, like I was saying, is, every time you have a curb cut, that's an area that a pedestrian, as is crossing the curb cut, it's 50-50 if a car is going to come in or not, right? Because that is an area that's actually permissible for a pedestrian or a car to actually be on. So, but in this case, and in most cases, for example, around a gas station, there tends to be very wide curb cuts because we want the trucks to go in or more cars to get in and get out. Well, all of that means that as a pedestrian, you are even more exposed to potentially getting into an accident or potentially having conflict with a car. Now, the one thing that I've always thought about complete street and also or the impact of having a dangerous street is, what does that mean in terms of the zoning, right? And this is something that we do a lot of here in Michael Baker. And number one, what you imagine is if you have a street that is very wide, a lot of cars driving by on it, then you're going to start having people building buildings that are actually with a big setback. And most of the time you start regulating so that setbacks are 10, 15 feet from the sidewalk. Well, what that means is a couple of things. Number one, by pushing the building further back, you're actually then minimizing the site potential for development, right? Because that means that now all that 15 feet is just going to be lawn instead of being an actual building that actually has a good frontage to the street. Number two is that because of the parking minimum and because of the fact that everybody has to drive here, then all of a sudden you have to have very big parking minimums, to allow for more people to drive here versus bicycling or walking here. But then there's another issue when it comes to a lot that stems from a dangerous roadway with the zoning that happens because of the dangerous roadway that I always call that actual perceived road width. You see, if you think about it, when people go through a tunnel, they automatically slow down. And the reason why they slow down is because there's that perceived notion of getting pinched by the walls and the ceiling and the roof of the tunnel, right? Well, if you don't have the perceived notion of being pinched by something outside of the car, people will tend to go faster. And so in this case, that perceived notion, all of a sudden, it's not 43 feet of paved asphalt, but it's actually 60 or 80 feet because of the setbacks that happens on the building. So this is where, having a roadway that is actually, designed for fast moving cars starts to inhibiting the proper development of the sites, but also it actually helps to make sure that the cars are driving fast. So what kind of solutions are there? And so these are some of the solutions that we sketched up for that report for Dangerous by Design for Smart Growth America, where we started looking at some of the ideas, right? And we said, well, one potential solution, which should be kind of inexpensive, is what if we put a 4-way stop sign and actually paying, pedestrian crosswalks? Well, that's all great, and that does work most of the time. But the problem with painting, and like I'm showing in this image here, is that sometimes painting it's more suggestive, and people will tend not to look at it. And in this case, it's interesting. This is in Hoboken, New York. The site on the left side that you see the little flexi poles, nobody's parking there, but the one that only has the painting, well, there's somebody parked there, right? Because it's just painting, it's nothing physical there. So what about if we think slightly more expensive? And so another potential is if we start looking at streetlights. But I mean, that does become quite expensive in the maintenance of the streetlights, and it's also just a streetlight, right? So what if we think outside of the box? What else can we do? Can we upgrade this intersection to be safer, but also start creating more of a center for the community? And that is where, even for that report, we looked at this potential, which is rather than 4 travel lanes, when there is enough, when the traffic is not critical, in terms of the load of traffic, if you are able to reduce it, then create an island in the middle. That island in the middle is almost, we call it the island of refuge, right? So a pedestrian is able to cross one travel lane, look the other way, cross the next travel lane, or in this case, it will be like 2 travel lanes basically that the island in the middle ends up being. So it's a good 14 feet that they don't have to freight Frogger. The other idea that I'm showing here, and I'm kind of like putting both ideas together on top of each other, is actually raising the intersection. The raising the intersection is an interesting concept because what it does do is that, number one, as cars are coming to the intersection, they have to slow down because now they're entering into a realm of pedestrians where pedestrians are the hierarchy, because the cars have to go up to the level of where the pedestrians are, which is the sidewalk, versus the other way when you have pedestrian on the sidewalk and they have to go down to the street level, even though it's painting, but you are literally on asphalt, which is more the realm of cars. And so those are some of the ideas and some of the thinking that we keep thinking about is what should be the priority. And in this case, we said, let's draw up these three ideas from one end to the other end. Now I'm going to jump a little bit into more of a broader concept, which is what is the economic impact that a really good street will have. And so for that, I'm going to go in and I'm going to pull a couple of slides out of a NACTO study that they did for York Boulevard in Los Angeles, where York Boulevard, they got one area, which is the western area, which is the one that goes from Eagle Rock all the way Avenue 55th. And they created a road diet, bike lane, and then from Avenue 55th all the way to Figueroa, then they just left it as no road diet, and they just added bike lanes to it, you know. And this is something that ended up happening. They did it, they built it, and then they did the study to see what the impact of it was, you know. And so there are multiple things, and you're welcome to please go to the NACTO website. The report is, again, like I said, is York Boulevard, the Economics of a Road Diet. It's a fantastic, really good read. But I just want to highlight two main points. And point number one is that the property sales prices of an area that has safer roadways, and in this case, the roadway, the road diet went from $229 to $270 per square foot. You know, so the actually all the residents, all the businesses, all the properties around the roadway were able to have a really good jump in terms of the sales prices. But more importantly, and this is the second part of that whole economic impact, is the tax that happens to the city. You see, as soon as you're able to create a safer road, people feel comfortable going out there. And the more people you have, like in this intersection that I was, the case of intersection that I was showing you, and the more potential you have for commercial to actually pop up. And so in this case, it was a significant increase from $727,000 to $1.1 million after the road diet was implemented in terms of the tax sales that the municipality was able to get. So not only does it make sense from the health perspective of everybody, all the residents that live there, not only, but also makes sense from the financial perspective of the people who are there close to the street, but also to the community itself. And then even more important, like I mentioned before, and I think this way they showed in a really interesting graphic where it was after with the road diet and no road diet, and the price difference between them. And what you see is that there was an increase of 18% on all the properties on the area where the road diet did happen, you know. Now, in some cases, it doesn't happen. In other cases, it does happen. But overall, lots of studies have been done throughout the United States to show that, you know, road diets and a safer street does end up meaning an increase in terms of cost of the prices for the properties, but also tax for the municipalities. And so, in short, what I wanted to say is, well, actually, before I do that, I did want to share one more project that I'm going to just drop in here because it was something of a latest addition. And this is a project that I did in California, and this is called Rolling Hill Estate. And what you see here on the right-hand side is a big mall. Actually, let me switch the view here to an aerial view. This is a big mall, and as you know, a lot of the malls are starting to close down because most people actually want to be experiencing, you know, more of a walkable space area. So the question for the municipality here was, how can we make this place to become the center of Rolling Hills Estate? So obviously, it was not just about looking internally at the mall, but looking also at the streets around it. And so that's what I wanted to show you is how both of those actually can start playing a role in making and helping the community to revitalize. And in this case, for example, from this mall, we did a couple of changes. And phase one was actually removing a portion of the inside of the mall, integrating a new street that will go through the mall. And then phase two was where we, oh, that's not phase two. Phase two is where now the street itself in front of the mall gets redone. because at this point we start to see that there will be enough people walking and wanting to go to this place, this new revitalized mall. But more importantly was, these are the streets right in front of the mall. It's a 4 travel lane with parking on both sides. And even though the traffic was quite elevated, but there was more need of parking. And of course, I imagine parking, it's actually a really great way to provide protection for pedestrians. So one of the things that we did was we developed a series of drawings, including this one, where we show what about once the mall gets removed, what happens in that facade. New development comes in, but then that street needs to be upgraded from a suburban type of street, 4 travel lane, to now a 2 travel lane with bicycle and perpendicular parking in this case, right? So you increase parking, you have more bicyclists, but also you have all this connectivity with that new urbanism that is being created. And then another view that I wanted to show, which is actually from the south looking toward the mall area. And we went from something like this to, oh, that's not it. Oh, geez. Okay, I'm not going to be able to show this view because for some reason I can't find my layers. But in short, the idea was that, how is it that the mall could go from, could connect to the street and the street connect to the mall? And that is what's happening in a lot of places. And for example, another project that I would like to share real briefly is in Inverness, Florida, where we actually work with NDOT to figure out how changing the contextual design for the roadway because of the changing of the zoning that happens along the street, along this roadway that NDOT was going and had as a suburban style into more of a main street type. So I guess what I want to say in short is, and I think we're going to leave a lot of time for questions and answers. Hopefully you guys have really good questions for us, is that, a complete street and safe street for all, it's all about, making the safer for the pedestrian and the community, but actually it's potential of creating new spaces for the community, is a potential of also increasing the economy, the local economy for all the businesses and all the residents that are there, and actually bringing back a lot of our little neighborhood corner store that we used to have before that have been closed down because of changes of economy out there. So yeah, with that, I think we have time for questions.
Yes, thank you so much for that fantastic presentation, Peter. I definitely learned a lot. I think we can start with a question that Robert Johnson has put in the chat. If anybody else has questions, they can raise their hand or they can just come off mute when you hear a dead space in the conversation. But he's asked a fairly complicated, tricky question. I'm wondering if you have thoughts. For anybody who's not seen it, he says that they've recently introduced parking maximums in their urban area. Great, that's good. However, they're running into issues of financiers telling them that they demand parking minimums. So any thoughts on that? Is this something you've dealt with in your work, Peter, or do you have any thoughts about?
Yeah, it's unfortunately that the banks they still haven't updated their Excel files, right? They still have that old formula where they need to have a certain amount of parking. So I live in the city of Pittsburgh, and the city of Pittsburgh has actually gone as far as removing all parking at all requirements, because we have a lot of really great transit. And sometimes, and that's a difficult one though. It's something that we may have to come back to you, but there are a lot of examples of places that has happened and it worked out really great. But that communication with the financial institutions is a difficult one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can do a little bit of digging. I mean, we know that there are definitely, as Peter said, places that have done it successfully. So there are bound to be some banks out there that are willing to, update their Excel sheets. But that's tricky. Would you like to add anything to that, Robert? Give any more context?
Yeah. I'm just going to brag a little on Nashville there. Not only did we remove the parking minimums, we used the same numbers, the same tables, and just substituted the word maximum. I mean, we're not talking no minimums. We're talking no minimums, and they became the maximums.
Wow.
So a little bit of bragging there. When you say Pittsburgh removed minimums, we took the next step.
Yeah.
We took the next step. Now, Britain Britain did that in the late 90s, early 2000s, but I was very impressed with Nashville doing that a couple of years ago. So a bit of bragging there. And then the second thing is, you know, that is a major break on development, because not only are we persuading the local developer now to design stuff that's different and new and that they have no experience of doing, but then some guy in New York or Los Angeles is telling them, no, I'm not going to finance that. Right. The remark of, well, they should just go away and find another bank. That's great, but we're not in charge of that. Not only are we not in charge of that relationship, but we should not be in charge of that relationship. He should deal with his own financier about his own financial matters. So it is a real break, because we're telling him to innovate, and then when he comes back, he says, I can't innovate. We tell him to go away and change his business practices. But that's just not realistic. It really isn't.
Yeah. That's great. No, and what's amazing is the cost of a parking, even a parking, right? Because the cost of one parking space could be anywhere from $15,000 to $25,000, $30,000 for any kind of development. So, you know, I mean, in a way, we're asking developers to build really nice buildings that are contextually similar to what we have in our cities, but then they get stuck with that, and then the density, and then so it's quite difficult.
Yeah, I think this sounds like a sort of systemic problem that potentially has a relatively easy fix, though, if we can do some talk to the right people. This is something I'm going to go to our land use team about and see if we can develop some program, maybe some education, maybe some programming around that. So thank you for bringing that to our attention, Robert. We appreciate it. And yes, kudos on taking the big steps in Nashville, and I think that's really exciting. Michelle has added another tricky problem that we hear somewhat frequently. Curious to hear how you solve emergency vehicle access and turn radius issues, which would likely restrict vehicle sizes with a sidewalk bump out at intersections. Any thoughts on this, Peter?
So I'm going to preface by saying that I'm not an engineer, so I could just tell you in terms of conceptual designs of what we have done. But for the majority of the time, what we tend to do is actually have so that it's mountable intersections. At the intersections, and also if you think about it for a minute, if you do the bump outs at the intersections, the radius could still be quite a big radius, right? But what you're trying to do is you're trying to decrease the time that a pedestrian is going to be crossing at the angles. Does that make sense? Or so I think that the bump outs actually allow you to have a better radius. I think that you could actually work on those too. And to be honest, I mean, you know, emergency vehicles, they are allowed to go absolutely anywhere. So yeah, mountable curb is one of those solutions that we have found that works.
And that is, I certainly, I don't want to start a fight here, but we do hear this a lot, and sometimes we feel that the exaggeration, the concerns are exaggerated. You know, there's this assumption that we have to be able to drive 3 gigantic fire trucks down the road at the same time. Really, when we really start to look at it, the needs, yes, that's a real concern, and we take it seriously. But we often find there are solutions. But thank you for raising that. Ed, is there any effort to educate this goes back to Robert's question, educate the lenders, or is every developer required to plead their own case to each lender? Yeah, and I think that's the sort of solution. It may be a Smart Growth America or some other organization really should do our homework, and that should not be the case for every developer, because the developers, as Robert mentioned, you know, they're focused, they're doing the right thing, and they've got plenty of other stuff to worry about. It's not their job to go and give education to lenders. So I think that's absolutely right, is you know, an organization or some policymakers perhaps could step in and say, hey, look, this is a systemic problem and needs to be addressed. Looks like Larry, do you have your hand raised?
Yes, I did. I just had kind of a theoretical and conceptual question.
Great.
we were talking about a complete street here in Huntsville, Alabama. And at some point we were talking about a way to sort of prioritize pedestrians and maybe transit. And the chief planner came back and said, oh, well, no, it's got to be a complete street. That means we can't prioritize anybody. Everybody has to have the same. So basically what he was saying, since cars historically have had a real advantage on most streets, they had to keep that advantage, and our complete street could only really just kind of do some things to accommodate pedestrians and buses. I was wondering if there's any good arguments to take to the planning department.
Wow. You want to get a first crack at it, Dustin?
I mean, I don't know what rules he's citing, but I know for a fact we see lots of cities that very clearly put a hierarchy and say, no, we are prioritizing, walking, biking, transit first, then, then private motor vehicles or some order therein. So I don't think that is written in stone necessarily. I'd be interested to see what rules exactly they're citing. And just as that's a perfect description of what basically happens almost everywhere. So I'm not surprised to hear it, the way things are, that's the way things have always been. And so we'll just keep them the way they are. And that's really what we're talking about, in these things is sort of going against status quo in some cases. But I believe that in most cases, if you're willing to take some chances and be a little bolder, you can switch those things around.
Thank you.
Hey,
Peter?
Justin,
Yeah, sure.
Diana, if I can jump in here, I can share here in Nashville some of the approach that we've taken. So for example, over on the East Bank, which is really mainly industrial development, we are actually have the opportunity to re-envision and reimagine what the East Bank looks like. And when we actually started working on those planning documents, we did set a hierarchy about how we were going to approach the street network in that entire area of the town. And so we did approach it where we made the pedestrian the priority, the bicyclists next, because they're the most vulnerable users on the roadway. And third, we looked at transit. And then I want to say we looked at the next thing, we actually looked at how we were going to handle goods and deliveries, because we want a very successful business community there. So how are we going to handle that? And the cars really became the lower end of the priority in our East Bank initiative as we were moving forward. And recognizing we didn't have the opportunity still, because right away is still the biggest challenge for all of us when it comes to a complete street discussion, we had to have the conversation about, well, do we put all of the modes on it, or do we look at putting, for example, we know we want this to be a transit priority corridor. We know we're going to have to cater to pedestrians. And really, maybe that's what we prioritize, and we look for a parallel road that can support the bicycle movement, but has really great connection to that main corridor. So I think when people talk about complete street, they think that every single mode has to be on there, but there's ways as you're planning and as you're having this conversation and you're talking and using land use as part of your conversation and not leaving it out, you think of all those elements and necessarily do not plan for every mode to be on that street, but making sure connectivity is happening for all modes, that safety is there and built in for all modes, but mostly focusing in on creating those safe space for the most vulnerable users. So I just got to throw that out, because that was kind of the approach we've been taking here in Nashville when we talk about complete streets. And that's why I wanted to kind of have these conversations through smart growth, and I'm so excited about bringing other folks in, is because it allows us, as was put forward by Pedro, it allows us to have the bigger conversation of reimagining the street.
Right.
So if you do bulb outs, it does slow a car down, and you know what? That's okay, because we've now made it safer for the most vulnerable users.
Right.
But don't take out of consideration, how do we still get our goods and services there? So it allows a better conversation, I think, to really happen. Love the case studies. I think we need more of those where it's a benefit and
Yeah.
not something that hurts how people get around and move.
Right. And you know, Zan, I think that you're spot on with everything you said. And so it reminds me also of another project that we're working in California. Now in California, there are parts of around Riverside that there's nothing but like warehouses. So in warehouses, for example, the world of warehouses where people drive because there's not even transit there, then the hierarchy is different, isn't it? The hierarchy there is actually the truck because that is the warehouses, that is where the trucks right by the airport, and that's everything that's happening there. And then, but if you're like in the center of a more urban condition, then the hierarchy should not be the truck. The hierarchy should be, like you said, people or places that you're trying to change and reimagine and redevelop. You know, the hierarchy should change into pedestrian and bicycle and transit. You know, so I think it's also like not doing what a lot of the not doing like a lot of the Department of Transportation do. Not that you guys are doing it, but other places. Which is like, you know, one size fits all solution, you know, like they know the engineering of highways and they're using that on the cities. Well, let's not do that same thing also, I think, with Complete Street. And I think you're right. Sometimes there's not enough width. Like in Pittsburgh, our roads are tight, you know, so we have to actually think of not one road, but two roads as being part of the Complete Street. Yeah.
Yes, and thank you for those additions, Diana and Peter and Ed. Yes, I'm interested to hear. I was interested to hear the conflicts that sorry, not Ed, Larry. The conflicts you're facing in Huntsville. If you want to write me an email, I'll put my email in the chat right now. Happy to talk to you about what your policy looks like, or what the policy framework is in your case, and that can be a big obstacle. And you know that might be a place to start in terms of making progress.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and real quick, I'm going to take. Ed has asked about federal funding. Is there federal funding available for this? Yes, absolutely. There is some. I would say if you don't know about this grant right now, it's live and the deadline is the end of this month. So if you are in a place that has not applied by August 29th, there's still time. It's a really easy application. And frankly, we've heard it is undersubscribed, meaning they're looking for people to apply. So if you apply, you probably have a very good chance of getting it. So if the city or town you're in has not applied, encourage them to do so. Nashville, have you all applied?
We actually received funds last year for Nolensville Pike. We received 13 million to do both some quick builds as well as a transformational section of it. So yes, we are recipients of the Safe Streets for All.
So this is just one example. Concerns about federal funding drying up? Absolutely, of course. You know, nothing is forever. So we'll see. But while it's there, certainly take advantage. And there are other sources of funding out there. But yes, there are a couple of questions here that are somewhat technical in nature. Chris is asking if Complete Streets, with all the features such as bike lanes, medians, buffers, if they end up being as wide as the streets that that Peter showed us at the beginning, are we just reinforcing and locking in this very wide right of ways? Might it make more sense to make the streets narrow and let use fill in that with more productive uses? Any thoughts there, Peter? How do you weigh these things in your head?
So I used to work for a firm in Miami called Duane Plater and Zyberg, and they came up with this whole concept of the transect, right? So the more urban area, that is one type of street condition. The more rural area is a completely different type of street condition. So I think that I feel that very strongly actually, that if you're like in a downtown setting, should you have bike lanes, or should bicyclists actually demount and walk because there are a lot of people walking around? That's a conversation, isn't it? If you're like in a center of a plaza, for example, where you have, you have a lot of pedestrians walking and people eating and stuff, the last thing you want to see is somebody biking super fast, because there are kids actually running around and playing, chasing after pigeons. So those are the kind of things I think that it's correct. I think that depending on where you are in the whole entire transit, or depending where you're in the street, maybe there are places that bicyclists should dismount or walk, but at least make it so that everybody has an equal chance, right? I mean, don't just make it tighter, but then still have the cars go fast. So make it tighter so that, cars slow down and then people are able to walk.
Yes. And Robert has a similar question. General guidance or high-level ways to quickly decide which choice should be made early in the Complete Streets project development before detailed modeling is undertaken. Robert, do you want to add anything about that, or are there like examples that you're thinking of how it would be useful?
No, actually, I think my question came in at exactly the same time as Chris Bowes did, and was almost the identical question. Thank you.
All right. But I think it could be useful, Peter, when you're doing these, when you're working on a project, can you tell us a little bit about your thought process? Do you jump right into really complicated things, or you use your gut instinct? How do you go about these things?
Well, I'm gonna try to share my screen again here, and I don't know if you folks tell me if you guys can see the my iPad there.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I always try to think about is again it's the transect of the place of the city of the place that we're working at. Because different places have different needs, and the pedestrians are going to be different if you're in a downtown setting versus if you're outside. And I'm just trying to find right now one of my transect drawings that I've done, which of course I'm going to have a hard time finding it right now. But so that's the number one thing that I always try to think about is where is it and what are the needs? What is it, the capacity, the neighborhood that is actually connecting versus someplace else? I don't know if that's making any sense.
It is. I think I know where you're going.
Okay. Do you want to type for a second while I find my drawings here?
Well, I'll help you out there, Pedro, and
Thank you.
I'll brag on Nashville again.
Will you?
Nashville again. We
love
went
that.
from 3 transects. We've either got 5 or 7 now. I think there's someone from planning department on the call, but we recently increased, not recently, but we increased our number of transects up from 3 to 5 or 7, and we got a lot more subtle about those different transects. So yeah, we've taken that on board. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So this is actually a place called Emmaus here in Pennsylvania. And you can see that the center, which is right in the middle, and this is where the here we go. And this is the main green space, for example. This is actually the area that is more darker red. And then the further out you go, the lighter the color becomes. So what does this mean? That means that in places like, and this is a retrofit, so this is not how we designed it, right? But in places like here that is more suburban style, there is actually no sidewalks because most of the people are like driving, they don't have sidewalks, and most of the people don't want sidewalks. So we said, fine. But then when you're entering into like this area, like around here, all these other beiges, that's where you start forcing the sidewalk to happen. But you also you start creating more bike lanes as an example. And then as you're entering more into the center itself, and because this is also one of those historic towns, there was not, like Diane said, there's not enough space for bicycle and sidewalk and the cars and everything else. What we end up doing in most cases was we remove the on-street parking in order to allow some sidewalks, especially along the main drag here, which is the way that you come in and out of town. So in that case, we did that on purpose, but then on all the other roads that are coming into town, we left the on-street parking, we left everything else, and then we asked the bicyclists to demount and be able to walk over. So it's so funny because it's actually a very old-fashioned way of looking at things. But if you look at all of our old towns, they always had that idea of the center being more urban, more core, houses much more packed together. The further out you go, more spread out. And the further out you go, that's where you have farmland, right? If you maintain that balance of all those transects, even that cars and bicycles and pedestrian and all that actually makes sense.
Okay, thank you for that. So in our preparation call, Peter offered a really interesting possibility, and if he's still open to it, with a few minutes that we have remaining, he said, would it be helpful to just like pull up a map and look at some areas? And I said, yeah, everybody's always got a problematic area. Now, this is not free professional advice. I would not take, it's not legally binding or anything like that. But anybody got a street or an intersection they want to look at? Maybe just together we can talk about it. Whether it's from your professional life or your neighborhood you live in.
Yeah, we could look at University Drive, which is also.
Oh wait, we're jumping to Alabama now, right?
Yeah, Huntsville. I'm
All
sorry.
right. Yeah, that's fine.
So it's just down a little bit south of where your map is there. In Huntsville, Alabama, we have a University Drive. That's an old U.S. Highway 72. It's now a major strode.
Mhm.
And the MPO is thinking about putting a rapid bus transit in there. I run a bicycle co-op, 501c3 nonprofit bicycle co-op, and do a lot of advocacy for bike safety and pedestrian safety. My sort of question, and maybe sort of some conceptual diagrams, is if we put in a bus rapid transit system, it seems to me one of two things could happen for bicyclists. One, it could become a lot more dangerous, or two, it could become a lot more safe. So I was wondering if there was some good tips on things to look for when the design comes back from the planning department for what they want to do with transit-oriented development and a rapid bus rapid transit system down University Drive.
Where are they suggesting that the line would be? Would it be against the sidewalk or in the middle of the road?
Well, it hasn't happened yet. So I mean, the design hasn't. They're just putting out the RFP for design at this point. So I guess that would be. I think that a lot of us are thinking that it would be best for the BRT to go down the middle, but we don't. I mean, there is no plan yet. I mean, there's no construction drawings or no. It's
Right.
It's
Well,
not shovel ready. Let's put it that way.
right. So that kind of reminds me, Dustin, of this drawing that we did also, right? And this was in Albuquerque, wasn't it?
Yeah, that looks like I believe so.
So,
Yeah.
Larry, you see my drawing here? This is actually they had the BRT in the middle of the highway of the road.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, and so in that case, it's so number one is how is it that people are going to get to it, and what we realize is that we were able to knock out a couple of travel lanes in some cases, so that means like people will be able to cross a lot easier. And at least the design that they had here in Albuquerque, and again, we had nothing to do with this design, but what we're saying is if a pedestrian is crossing here, they're crossing two travel lanes that you see here, right? So that's 12 and 12, that's 24 feet, right? Because the other one here in red is just the bus. So at least I don't have to play Frogger with the bus, but the cars are the problem, right? But once they end up in the middle, then they have the island where the buses actually stop and go and pick up passengers and all that, So there's that one system. Now, in Washington, D.C., they have completely reverted that, where they have the bicycle on the side of right by the sidewalk, and then they have the buses right next to it. So if I'm going to go back to the other drawing, if my iPad lets me, and I'm going to just sketch out what Washington did. But Washington basically they said we're going to have the BRT going right here, and then we're going to have, for example, the BRT going right here, and then we're going to have the bump outs here for the bus stops, and then here is where they had the bicycle happening, which meant that pedestrian going to the bus stop, they have to cross the bicycle path, right? Which means that at the same time, that means that you have to also let bicycles. And what they did was very interesting is that they actually had a hump, right, Dustin? Do you remember that? They had a little hump. So bicyclists would actually go up at the level of the sidewalk and of the bus stop, so that way it was a conscious thing that the bicyclists were changing, the Y factor. And so they knew they were going up, they were about to cross the pedestrian realm, so they automatically knew they had to slow down. But what was interesting about this process, this idea, is that they still painted the bicycle in blue. So even though they went up on that little hump, they painted it blue, so pedestrian knew that there was bicycle, traveling. So does that make sense? So I think those are two ways of designing it,
Okay.
right?
That is a really good example, though. Section of, in fact, I think it's real close to where I did organize a crash analysis studio with Strong Towns.
Okay.
A bicyclist was killed right close to that, within a couple blocks.
Oh,
The other thing about that, though, is that what's really interesting is how much the setbacks are, and how much space is there. And again, you get into that, what you were talking about, the tunneling, or the
yeah,
perception of a wide open freeway.
yeah.
And that goes right through a very populated and commercial area. And it's also, you can probably see right there in that example that you're looking at, is how many entrances and egresses there are onto university. So they really need to start closing off some of those places where you can get on and off of university. I mean, either make it a highway or make it a road, which I guess is.
That's great, and a great example, Larry. I think let's try to get one more in, and we're excited to hear what comes out of the study in Huntsville. And please let us know at Smart Growth how things are progressing there, Larry. Ed has put Harding Place and Nolensville Road in Nashville. See if you can find that real quick.
Harding Place?
Harding Place and Nolensville Road.
Is that it?
Is that it, Ed? Or Chris, who seems familiar with it?
No, that's a different side road off of Harding Place.
Just want to go
Place and-
half a mile
like the
down the road.
main, it's the main intersection. You can see it from outer space right here, just to the left of where the red marker is. Yep.
Good gosh.
Yeah, there you go. You've got the Hardys, you've got the old Shoney's, that's the advanced finance. You've got the floodplain over here. You've got IHOP with the blue roof. Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
Okay, I'm depressed. Okay. I mean, but this is one of those examples of a highway engineer using highway standards, right? Because even this turning radius for the for this right turns, I mean, it's telling you that it's a fast travel space, and pedestrians have very little space there, right? And then the other question is like, do they need I guess the traffic the volume of traffic must be high enough, right, to warrant all this travel lanes, right, Ed?
It's one of the top, has always been, as long as we've lived in Nashville, has always been one of the most challenging intersections and most traveled intersections.
Wow. So one of the things that we try to do in this case, and again, remember, I'm not an engineer, but I always like to draw things and poke at things. This kind of like little islands here, actually, they tend to play a really great role, for pedestrians to actually stop. But another idea potentially is to actually increase the width of this of that median, so that now you're crossing two lanes, and then you have a place for you to stop and rest, and then you end up crossing the next oh my God, 1, 2, 3, 4 lanes, and then you end up having a space to rest, just because if there's that many traffic lanes, then, just try to split it out and maybe have a median, a good sized median that actually gives some refuge for pedestrians. But, having this type of turning radius here means that people will probably do it in 35 miles per hour, without necessarily stopping. And so you could imagine a pedestrian here, it's going to be kind of difficult. So sometimes actually tightening up this turning radius or taking it into like a more of a actual urban condition could help. But then again, trying to make that crosswalk better by having a median between the two counter travel lanes.
Couple
Maybe
things.
eliminating it,
I'm sorry?
or maybe even eliminating the turn lane.
Oh, right, yeah. Right, so yeah, that's exactly what I meant is, you eliminate this guy here. You make this turning radius so it's enough for a truck to turn, right? And then probably put like a median here. So in other words, you have to widen things up a little bit here, right? So you could get that real estate for the middle of the road. But enough so that you have a space that people are able to stop and take a breather before they get to the next one. I mean, it's just tough. Yeah.
This sits a little high. The land that you see is the floodplain for 7 Mile Creek, and the road sits a little higher. And then a little bit to the south of that, you'll see where it crosses 7 Mile, and you've got a buildup there every day. The rush hour traffic backs up way up the hill off to the left. So the volume of traffic is just huge. And so you got traffic issues, you've got pedestrian issues, you've got a hospital to the southwest of that. You've got a Walmart to the north, or excuse me, to the southeast of that. You got a Walmart that replaced Harding Mall. You've got that Walmart with that big parking lot. You've got Habitat in the building with the white roof that they have reclaimed the old Kmart there. And one other thing that may happen at some point, and I'd like your input here, is that the area in front of that white roof,
Yep.
that big parking lot that used to belong to Kmart, at some point, I imagine somebody'd like to go ahead and put some residential in there because this is a major transit corridor, 2 major transit roads. So what do you do thinking 5 years from now if somebody puts 250 apartment units in that parking lot? And another 250 on the other side from Habitat.
Yeah.
If there's more residential here, what do you do thinking ahead 5 years?
So if I had a magic wand and I was able to like make some retrofitting some things, the first thing I would look at is, and I think I go back to what Diana mentioned, which is sometimes if you don't have enough space in one road, maybe look at other roads around. And in this case, I mean, and I'm gonna just draw it in red here, but you can see that the overall traffic actually it seems to be this, right? And there are no other connections between those. And so that's the reason why this intersection becomes so loaded, because everybody has to go through there. In a perfect world, I would imagine that there would be other roads, other ways of making that connection north, south, east, west, that then this intersection would not be so heavily loaded. But you have, so basically you have to kind of like, help the heart here, like pull out a little bit of that load into this intersection. And it's going to be difficult because everything else is built up, right? And so I imagine that by you increasing and having housing at these, I think you said here, is that correct?
No, that's the Walmart parking lot to the left.
Oh, this one
right,
here.
yeah,
Yeah.
that white roof.
Right. Wow. If you imagine if you're putting 250 homes here, I mean, which would be great, but the problem is that it becomes the same thing that happens a lot, which is like all these hodgepodge of different pieces of development that sometimes don't connect very well. I mean, it's just a problem with the network here in a way, overall network, isn't it?
Yeah.
Transit-oriented development. That's my suggestion, a term that I'm sure you're all familiar with, and that's my very simple response.
I will let
Dustin,
you go
can
ahead
you-
and be the person that does the neighborhood meeting to tell the neighbors about those 500 units that may go there at some point. But yeah, you're right. We need the housing, but then what do you do about the traffic, and what do you do about the strain on all the infrastructure for all the other houses around it?
Right. And I mean,
Dustin, it would be great if you could just give a quick overview of transit-oriented development.
So that is really developing around transit rather than thinking of transit as this thing that connects people from point A to point B, you really think of transit hubs as the development point. So when you're thinking about, big developments, we put high frequency, high volume transit, whether it's bus rapid transit, as Larry was talking about in Huntsville, or, underground metro if you're in a bigger area that can accommodate it, or just some way so that you have high frequency, reliable, dignified transit to get people to their destination. So connecting them to where the jobs are, connecting them to other places. And I'm sure Nashville is thinking in these terms, but I'm also going to draw attention to our to the time. Peter, you're showing us Pasadena.
Oh, yeah. Just an example of TOD, and this is exactly what it is. You have the light rail that goes right through you see the tracks there, right?
Literally
The light
through
rail
it.
goes right through, literally goes through the building, and all this right there is a lot of like high density that people just get off and go straight to their apartment from the system. So, and that means less cars.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, with that, and I know that's easier said than done, and I certainly recognize the challenges that go with it, but that's definitely the approach we would advocate. With that, though, we're at time. This has been a fantastic conversation. I really thank everybody who has participated, and especially thank you to Peter, who has given us some really great insights and food for thought.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Peter.
Diana, any final
This was
words?
great. Thanks everybody for joining. I know we're running a little bit over, but just remember we're going to have another session next month. And Peter, thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot. So I always love it when I get to come to something and I think I know most of it, and then I find out there's still so much more to learn. So I really do appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to help us and to share your experience with us here in Nashville and from Alabama and anywhere else in the United States that's joining us. And until next time, please think of us. Join us next month. We'll be sending out some more emails letting y'all know. And Dustin, again, my thanks to Smart Growth America for, helping us, pull this conversation together. This has just been amazing. So see you guys in September. Until then, everybody, please stay safe and take care of each other. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye.